At Myron Construction, our passionate team members rally together every day to create meaningful connections and capture what truly matters. Within our offices and out on our project sites, Myron's strong culture and core values permeate everything we do and guide our approach to serving our clients, our communities, and each other. Together, we're building excellence.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Iowa Ideas. This is our 9th installment of Iowa Ideas, an event that explores topics that are important to Iowans, the challenges, the opportunities that are there. We're midway through our first day, and we're excited to get this panel underway. Before I do that, obviously, I'd like to thank session sponsor Myron Construction, as well as our presenting sponsor, ITC Midwest. Their support and the support of all of our sponsors is what makes this possible. And so thank you to each of them. For questions during today's conversation, you'll be able to submit those by entering them in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen or into the Zoom chat. Those will be forwarded to us, and we will work them into the conversation as we're able. I'm Zach Kacharski. I'm the executive editor at the Gazette. And so you are in a panel in the energy and environment track. And we are talking today about Iowa's response to the growing power demand. And so Iowa, just like other parts of the country, the demand for power is growing. Data centers, artificial intelligence, and other things are driving the need for additional electricity. And so we're going to have a conversation about that today. I'm going to introduce each of the panelists, have them introduce themselves, and talk a little bit about their organizations, and then we'll kick things off. And so, Jordan, do you want to kind of get us going?
Yeah, that'd be great. Hello, everybody. Jordan Oster. I'm with the Iowa Environmental Council. I am the Energy Program Director. IEC, we're a nonprofit organization, and we're celebrating the 30th year since our founding. We have 3 primary focuses for our organization. We work in the policy and advocacy space on issues of energy, water, and climate. We have about 100 different organizations and businesses that call themselves members, and we engage with thousands of grassroots Iowans on the issues that they care about.
Great, thank you. Sarah.
Yep, thanks everybody. My name is Sarah Martz. I'm the chair of the Iowa Utilities Commission. The commission is a 3-member body of the executive branch of the Iowa government. So we are here to regulate certain utilities in the state. And for this panel, probably most relevant is that we regulate the 2 investor-owned electric utilities in the state, Mid-American and Interstate Power and Light, or Alliant Energy. The state regulators also have a role at the regional level with the grid. I serve on the Organization of MISO States, which is a group that has a commissioner from each state in the MISO region and helps to advocate for state and regional issues in kind of overall grid planning.
All right. Kylie.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hi, I'm Kylie Miller. I first want to say thank you to the Gazette and the organizers of today's event and my fellow panelists. I'm a relatively new team member at Alliant this month. I'll celebrate my 2nd year. And my role is manager of economic development and data center services. So I work with communities to attract new industry. And also because of the emerging demand that you already mentioned for data centers, I work directly with data center users to help bring them into our service territory.
And last but not least, Scott.
Thanks, Zach, and thanks to the Gazette for putting on Iowa Ideas again this year. And it's a pleasure to be a sponsor of that again at ITC. So I am the Director of Public Affairs for ITC Midwest, headquartered right here in Cedar Rapids. And we focus solely on electric transmission. So the high voltage lines that are kind of the highways and superhighways of the electric grid system, making sure that the power is moved where it needs to be. Our customers are utility companies. And then those utility companies deliver that power from our transmission system to their users. They also are the generators of that power, or someone is a generator of that power that is delivered there, but we are not. We do not do generation. We just focus on the transmission piece of that. And it is a pleasure to be here today and to be part of the conversation.
All right. Well, I think for an opening kind of question, it helps folks level set and maybe understand the different perspectives. But we'll start with just a basic question. I was forecasted to see a significant growth in demand for additional power. And what are some of the challenges and the opportunities with being able to meet that demand? And Jordan, I guess I'll start with you, and we'll evolve from there.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Well, I think that the federal government's rapid about face on renewables, and they're putting the thumb on the scale for a fading coal power industry, really has changed the dynamics and leads to more work to be done on the clean energy transition. Despite the best efforts of the administration to pick winners and losers during their time, I do think that clean energy is going to eventually win out, and the market had been moving in that direction prior to these moves and the change in environment. And I think we'll get back to that point again, whether it's policy or if it's tariffs or other things that are affecting the procurement of clean energy infrastructure. But there's certainly there's a lot of room for error, I think, in the next half decade as we make decisions about energy. I think that we could see ratepayers potentially straddled with stranded assets, especially if things don't pan out for this demand. I think we really need a full picture of what the demand's going to be. I think we need a constant evaluation of what those projections are. I think we need utility planning that also thinks about the resources and the cost effectiveness to utility customers. I worry that if we build out more than what is needed, or the industry's needs change because there's a great technological advance or a bubble bursts somewhere along the way, ratepayers aren't going to be the ones that are straddled with extra generation. I think that clean energy is the most deployable resource right now. Solar plus storage, still without government incentives, is the most cost-effective solution. It could add more capacity to the grid and more dispatchable power, which is very important. Though it really appears more difficult now than it was before, there's still a great need to bring new clean energy solutions online rapidly.
Okay, I'll stay in the same order that I went the first time. Sarah.
Yeah, thank you. I don't think anyone would argue that we're at kind of a transformational time for the power grid. We're at a time where older technologies are retiring, but we're also seeing massive load growth that hasn't been seen in decades. So the challenges with that, I'll echo some of Jordan's concerns. There's huge costs that come with upgrades like this, and one of the Utility Commission's roles is to ensure that costs are allocated fairly to the customers that have to pay for them. And utility planning is really important for that. If we're spending tens of billions of dollars to upgrade the grid, we want to know that that's based on really good planning. So there's planning that goes on at the transmission level, the generation level, the distribution level. And we want to make sure that stakeholders are part of that process. It's a transparent process, and that we've got the best data that we can to make those decisions. And at the end of the day, the goal of the Utility Commission is to make sure Iowans have reliable, safe, affordable energy available to them, and that Iowa can be prosperous because we have this availability of reliable, affordable power. So I think it is a big challenge, but I think if we work together, we can definitely meet it.
All right, Kylie.
Well, thank you for the question. I certainly appreciate the comments from Sarah and Jordan, and absolutely, Alliance goal. Our purpose is to serve our customers and build stronger communities. And in that vein, we certainly look at this energy growth opportunity as great for our customers because it'll allow us to sell more power, thereby distributing our fixed costs across more kilowatt hours, and thus making it possible to constrain our rates going forward. We're in the middle of a 5-year standoff to where we cannot increase our rates. We will not increase our rates for the next 5 years. And as we move forward, we're really optimistic that this new load will enable us to keep rates down. Our energy strategy is an all-in strategy, all of the above strategy with renewables, new natural gas, battery storage, et cetera. And we're confident that the regulatory framework and the contract framework that we're developing with these new customers will both enable us to serve their new load and protect our existing customers.
All right, Scott.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I appreciate the comments that have been made so far. I'll try not to kind of step on those too much, but I may call on them again. There are challenges. You vet a prospect. I've done economic development in my past life. You vet the prospect so that you make sure when it's time to start investing that they're going to come. But there's always that risk. There's always that concern, and I recognize that. And again, that's where particularly the distribution utilities, but us as a transmission utility as well. Before we start investing, before we do too much in the planning, we need to know that load's going to be there, or something else is going to come in that place there. The other thing, some other challenges that we're quite frankly seeing right now is supply chain. We're looking at 3-year turnaround periods for some of our equipment because one, you're still coming out of some of the COVID impacts, but also you're seeing every other utility that's trying to meet these challenges for new load growth. And so again, when you counteract we want to make sure it's real but we got to get this online at a time that the customer is going to actually arrive, and we're not going to break an agreement with them. It's tough, but we're working on that. We've added suppliers to our list that we're working with. We're adjusting, to say, okay, well, we've got these projects, but we can move the same equipment up in the projects, and our standardization of our system has helped with some of that. But again, there are challenges, but I've been doing this for 24 or 25 years. And this is the first time in my utility career where I've been sitting there looking at something that's more than a 0.0 or 0.some% growth rate. And the opportunity for the utilities is fantastic. The opportunity for our customers is fantastic. As Kylie mentioned, if you've got more units sold to spread costs over, that's a benefit we just haven't had here, particularly in the eastern part of the state for some time. And then these are also large energy users that need jobs. They have good jobs associated with them. But when you're in the state of Iowa and you only have so many people who live here, it's hard to bring in some of these manufacturing companies that need lots and lots of people. And so this is a good opportunity for the state of Iowa. And as I've been talking with some of the folks in the AI space, the sooner you can get AI into your area, the more it opens up the door for other advanced manufacturing that's depending on that AI and wants to eliminate the latency between their data getting from the plant to the data center and back again. And so I think huge opportunities coming here for all parts of Iowa related to these data centers. And that would be my answer to the opportunities.
Okay. I want to ask a little bit about planning, and for those of us that are not sitting around each day thinking about some of these issues, how far out is demand usually modeled? But then, Scott, to your point about the length of time, building a power plant is not an overnight process. How far out are these things usually modeled? And is that, in the current state that we're in, where some of these projects and the demand is significantly higher, is that still effective? And I'm not sure who would want to jump in first on that one.
I can start from a transmission perspective. I'll leave the generation to others, but since that's not ours, although obviously generation interacts. But so we do each year we do studies that look 2 years out, 5 years out, and 10 years out. And so obviously each year then we'll do that again. And that's our internal planning study. It's for the reliability to make sure that we've got enough power in the right places so that our customers, the utilities that serve customers in Iowa, are able to supply power and also to get their generation moved where it needs to be moved to. We follow, generation plans from the utilities. We look to our utility customers to tell us what they see in the load forecast. And that's probably where it's tough. Again, not wanting to start planning for something that we don't see will come. Generally, you'll find our planners to be a little more conservative on that, and not to over plan for something until we know it's there, and then we find ourselves quickly trying to move forward, especially on some of these spot projects to get those done. The other thing I'll mention too on the transmission side is that we're doing the 2, 5, and 10, but then MISO, the regional organization overseeing the grid for most of the state of Iowa, is looking 20 years out now and doing larger plans, and we're seeing some pretty significant regional projects being assigned and built based on meeting those needs for the long term, and they're looking at that more of the macro view versus just utility by utility, just to make sure that we don't end up with issues where you got one utility in great shape and next to one that's not, because we're all interconnected in the end and we need to make sure it works together. So that's kind of the answer for you, Zach, from a transmission standpoint.
I suppose I can piggyback on that with generation. As an essential service provider, we're acting constantly to meet the needs of our customers for several decades out, and that includes a constant resource planning process. But earlier this year, we unveiled a new resource evaluation study. There was many stakeholders involved in that process, including the IUC, the Office of Consumer Advocate, and it includes a 20-year projection and then a 5-year action plan. It's really an interesting study and one that can be made available, but it includes a variety of objectives such as affordability, reliability, and sustainability. And it also takes into consideration various scenarios. What happens if demand falls? What happens if new technology leads to a demand decline? Or what happens if all of the growth that we anticipate actually does occur? And what it emphasized was the need for Alliant Energy to continue to add to our balanced energy portfolio with wind, natural gas, and storage. Now, specifically, we currently anticipate 2.1 gigawatts of new load from data centers between 2025 and 2030. All of that is built into our resource plan. Any new load beyond that would be expected to be served primarily with new energy resources.
Yeah, I'll jump in too. I think to your question on the time frames, short-term modeling and planning, the 2 to 5 year time frame, all the way up to the 20-year time frame, they're really useful, but they're useful for different reasons. And kind of like Kylie and Scott mentioned, at every level, kind of from regional down to distribution level, there's planning that utilizes different scenarios and kind of gives us the reasonable bounds that we should be planning to, so that we don't kind of make a misstep in investing in something that we're not going to need in the future. So I would leave everyone with, I think, a modified quote from a statistician of all forecasts are wrong, but some are useful. So we've been talking a lot about this in the utility space. We know that, none of these forecasts are going to be completely spot on, but we have to plan to something. And when we put those intelligent assumptions in, we at least know we're going to get something that's reasonable and not kind of out in left field.
Yeah, I'll just say, the more data, the better. The more data points, the more folks who are looking at this at different angles, the better. I think thinking if there's other, triggers that might, push more resource planning, if it's, 100 megawatt hyperscale data center, or in the future something of, massive size. Yeah, I think they're, when we start thinking about, these giant projects coming online, I think we should also reassess how that is going to affect the system in more real time as well.
I wanted to ask a clarifying question. Scott, you used the phrase spot project, and I was curious what that includes.
Yeah, and I don't know how wide of a term that is that's used. It's something that we've been talking about it when we chat with our planning folks. I think that one of the major changes that we've seen in our planning process is that we at one time, you might have said, okay, well, we expect there to be a 1 or 2% load growth over time, which again, for some parts of our state is actually high, but anywhere from 0 to 1 or 2%. And then you kind of said, and you'll get 1% of that, what's here now here. And you spread it out across that. Data center projects are unique, obviously, in that it's a very large amount of power and it's in a very close-in area. There's some challenges there because obviously it has a larger impact to the area. There's also, quite frankly, some benefit if you're going to add, 100 megawatts of new load, and you can add it in one area with one set of infrastructure. That comes at a lower cost over time to customers than if you're adding, 5 megawatts here and 5 megawatts there, 5 megawatts. And you're having, now again, your infrastructure is not going to be as big in each of those places, but there's going to be some overlap or redundancy that's built in each of those individual areas to serve the individual load that's spread out. So again, when we talk about spot, we're really talking about, we're planning at now the micro level to a certain extent because there's a very large load in that one spot.
Okay, I was assuming that was what you meant, but I didn't want to make an assumption that was wrong. I was curious also, this may be a question that all of the panel knows, but maybe the audience doesn't. I was curious if we could talk a little bit about the process of, once a project is needed, what is the process that is involved in planning, feedback, and how does that come to be? Where does public input come into play? Can you walk through the process of a project is needed? Now, what happens?
You want to start on that, Kylie? Because Kylie, I mean, we work together on a lot of projects. We're working together on projects that no one's probably heard about yet. But I mean, it starts really early and kind of works through. So I don't know if you want to start to introduce that kind of, Kylie, and I can add in there.
Well, I am curious if I could ask for clarification, Zach. Are you saying a generation project, or are you saying like what the process is where one of these large loads gets sited?
I'm just thinking just the generation project, just generally. It doesn't specifically have to be your project. I was just thinking of a lot of times there are different regulatory bodies that come into play. We're sitting in Eastern Iowa, so we have Duane Arnold, which is probably a different process that's in play. But if you wanted to build a power plant today, what has to happen in order for that to come to be?
Well, that's a great question, and I'm not going to pretend that I am the expert on siting generation. Okay, but that process begins with, as we've already talked about, load modeling. What's the need, and is there a quantifiable need? Alliant Energy, as a regulated utility, doesn't make speculative investments. We're investing to fulfill the known and anticipated needs within our system. Then there is a regulatory process for siting, and that includes significant stakeholder engagement. Involved in that would, of course, be the Iowa Utilities Commission, but also local groups. Local government has a critical role to play, local advocacy groups. And that takes place very early on before we would bring forward a project ultimately for construction. The factors that might be considered is the availability of land, the availability of whatever that particular energy input is, whether that be natural gas or just the wind capacity or solar capacity in that particular area. And I should add, as I wrap this up, that our process for working with these large loads, I know you were speaking generally, but our process for working with these large loads, of course, obligates them to take power, but also is meant to synchronize the arrival of that new generation onto the system with the arrival of that demand. So there's not a latency in the overall process.
Yeah, maybe I'll just jump in to add to Kylie's comments a little bit. Generically on the state siting process for generation, if it's over 25 megawatts, generally that requires a generator certificate from the IUC. And like Kylie said, there's that process starts out with a public information meeting that the IUC holds in collaboration with the utility in the community where it's going to be built. And then throughout the case, there's also opportunity for public comment as well.
Maybe I'll just add here on the renewable side, that often we have seen as more contentious at the local county level, and that is something that has been speeding the development of getting those projects approved and online. So those projects that are not going in front of the IUC for approval, but going in front of a supervisors or zoning board of adjustment, we've seen more restrictions on that in recent years.
I also wanted to ask, so in the Inflation Reduction Act, there were credits that were made available, and this kind of goes along the lines of planning. And I think that, in order to make use of those credits, the timeline has been shrunk. And I was curious, I think it's that in order to qualify for those credits, they have to be under construction by, I think it's July 4th of next year. And then in operation by 2028. I'm curious if that's what tightening that window has done. Does that make it more of a challenge in terms of these aren't necessarily projects that you can just get going? Does that create more challenge? And is it realistic that a lot can happen that quickly?
Well, I suppose that would be for me, and it's a great question. Of course, there is as are all industries, the utility industry is a dynamic environment right now. But as I've said before, Alliant is committed to a balanced energy mix, and some of our customers may not know this, but we actually rank among the top 5 utilities for owner operators of regulated wind energy in the U.S. We have currently 1.8 gigawatts of wind capacity across Iowa, Wisconsin, Minnesota. And in July 2025, we announced some new load or new plans for wind generation. That'd be a gigawatt, 1,000 megawatts of new wind in Iowa. And we've added, I think, 1.5 gigawatts of solar in the last couple of years. To your specific question, I'm very pleased to report that because we were planning these generation investments previously and had been proactive, 100% of our renewable projects through 2028 have been what's called safe harbored. That means we've met the threshold wherein we will be able to take advantage of those ongoing renewable generation credits through 2028.
Yeah, and I won't comment specifically on any projects here, but I just say that the utility industry as a whole is kind of under this time crunch, right? We're trying to accommodate these large loads as quickly as possible, and that's happening at every level. And the new wrinkle that you mentioned of the PTC credits is just another kind of one on top of it. We've got supply chain, we've got generator interconnect queue that takes quite a long time. So utilities are handling a lot of challenges at the moment.
I'm curious, it's kind of come up in a couple of the comments so far, but you don't want to build generation that doesn't end up coming online. And some of these projects, the data centers or other, big energy users are, that process is pretty competitive. And you know, at times, you know, the project that comes to be maybe doesn't pan out. How do you prevent, you know, building too much in way of generation and making sure that you're in sync? I mean, you don't want to have too much power, because then ratepayers are probably on the hook paying for something that's not needed. How do you walk that line?
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'll maybe jump in on this one. And I think there's other states we might be able to look to for some guidance. There's, you know, we're not the only one, you know, wrestling with these issues and seeing, you know, load growth and data center proposals and projections. You know, Minnesota, I know that, you know, there's considerations around a policy of bring your own generation. So seeing if these large companies would pay for the power generation, whether that's gas, whether that's renewable, bring that online themselves. You know, we've seen Facebook do that when they first got here in Altoona, here in Polk County. They did power purchase agreements in wind farms in Iowa to directly power their load. I think you can also look to Ohio. This is a pretty active and ongoing thing. The utility there, AEP, is considering a tariff that requires the companies, the data companies, to pay up to 85%, pay for up to 85% of the projected load that they think they'll demand. I think that things like this are, you know, good consumer protections. You know, just that case in Ohio that I mentioned, there's one data center that cut in half what they thought they were expecting after that new tariff was put in place. So I think there could be some reevaluations of how large these operations need to be, but also how much power they're assessing that they will need.
I suppose I could offer a couple of comments. Earlier this year, the Iowa Utilities Commission authorized Alliant to offer what we call an individual customer rate, or an ICR. This is essentially a new vehicle that we can use to negotiate contracts with large users. And it's meant to be a win-win-win for existing customers, the new customers, and of course, shareholders in our company as a whole. And it does that by authorizing Alliant to negotiate several protections into the contracts with these large users. And so specific to this issue, we have within that negotiation process a vehicle or a mechanism wherein we can be protected. We can protect our other customers in the event that a new load doesn't emerge or does not achieve the full growth that was originally anticipated, just as Jordan mentioned. So we already have in place a mechanism to protect our existing customers should load not emerge as we anticipate.
I am curious, when it comes to all of this happening, you know, I was not alone in terms of what's happening. When it comes to policy, how are you kind of looking at, you know, opportunities there, whether it's, you know, examples of how problems were solved in other places, or, you know, how do you go about kind of thinking about solutions to some of these problems that maybe are happening live?
Was that a question at like the regulatory level, Zach?
Yes.
Clarify? Okay.
Yeah, Zach, so I failed to say this in my intro, I can't comment on some kind of more specific cases that could come before the IUC, but I guess in concept, I would just say, you know, the IUC has a process where stakeholders are able to provide a lot of input into our cases, and we get a lot of that feedback there. So interveners, we call them, into our cases, can file testimony and examples from other states if that's what they want to point out kind of as a best practice. We also, the IEC will have tech conferences on certain issues to just kind of get open input on a problem or a challenge or concern. And then, like I said, we also do participate at a regional level, at the MISO level, and there's lots of conversations there about what's happening throughout the Midwest region, how best practices are developing throughout the country, really, and what we can learn from those.
Okay, thank you. Now, I was also curious, in the Cedar Rapids market, we're hearing radio ads about a facility, I think it's a rice facility, Kylie, that can come on and offline multiple times in a day. I'm curious, what this does, and, how do these types of facilities help kind of the overall, balance of load?
Sure. So the facility in question, as you mentioned, the rice facility, we consider that a peaking plant. And right there in that name, I think you get an idea of what it means. It's at a time of peak load. So a plant like this is meant to generate electricity for short periods of time when there is high consumer demand, or known as peak demand. It also could compensate at periods when renewable generation maybe isn't operating as fully because of low wind or a lack of good solar capacity. They typically use gas turbines, just as you described, and they're able to ramp up quickly to meet that short-term demand and then ramp back down, as opposed to those systems that are meant to operate perpetually and are most efficient in that regard. And what they really do is they increase grid stability and the reliability overall within the system.
And, do you place those in strategic areas, or how the placement of those types of facilities, is the idea to kind of put them closest to where they may be needed, or?
I'm going to have to punt on that, Zach. I don't cite generation.
That's fair.
So I don't have an answer for you.
That's fair.
Maybe I'll just add that gas turbines aren't going to be immune to the procurement as well. There is a bit of a backlog on those nationally and internationally, just like a lot of the infrastructure that we've been talking about here today.
I was also curious a little bit about, we've talked about this, storage in a few different ways. And I was curious about the expansion of storage, how much has been built into the statewide system now, and, what capacity, how long can some of that work, and what potential is there in storage within Iowa?
Well, I can speak for Alliant. I don't want to speak for the state as a whole, but we do, in fact, have battery storage already on our system. And I'll tell you, if you're a naturally curious person and you're interested, this is one of the most exciting spaces in utilities. Because, when we think of battery, we think of like something like a Duracell, right? But there's all kinds of different energy storage solutions. So for Alliant Energy, I mentioned our resource plan. We currently have planned for, I think it's 500 megawatts of battery storage, 4-hour battery storage, to be added to our system in 2025, 2026, and 2027. So that's 500 cumulatively. And that's relatively known technologies. But it's interesting, there's also emerging technologies, something I'm super excited about. Alliant is partnering in Wisconsin on something called Energy Dome. And I'm going to give you the Luddite description of this. Imagine a moment when there's a lot of power on the grid and it's not being used. That power can be used at an Energy Dome site to compress carbon dioxide, CO2, to liquid form, thereby sort of storing up the energy. Then at periods of high demand with limited capacity on the system, that compressed CO2 is allowed to convert back to gas. That's used to drive a turbine, and you can use that to generate new power. So beyond the typical batteries that you're thinking about across the industry energy space, there's new technologies emerging like Energy Dome, and Alliant is proud to be at sort of the vanguard of some of this technology.
There's very specific uses for battery storage, and a lot of it depends on what the generation nearby is, and whether there'll be times of producing surplus that you can put in there. When we're planning the system, we have to look at battery storage as both a supplier of power but a user of power, and that's true with a lot of these storage things, because you got to have something to power it to put in there. And so the planning for the utility is interesting in that some things we plan on kind of an average. You can't plan it on an average. You have to plan it on the highest use at any given moment to make sure you've got enough power to remain reliable and resilient in those extreme conditions. And obviously you do that within a range, but you don't want to come up short there. And so as we're planning that, again, the best placed battery storage is that's next to or close to generation, where it can capture that when there's excess there and it's available. But it does become a user of energy during those times that it's capturing that too. So I just thought I'd share that. It's kind of an interesting piece. We think about it almost as another generation source, and it is sometimes, but it's also another energy user at some points during the day or a week or however, it's how much it's storing.
Yeah, I'm really excited for the opportunity of storage, and this is something that was less harmed by the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, and does have more runway compared to some of the other credits that are being sunsetted early. I think there's a really exciting Alliant project that was just approved in Lansing, Iowa, on the site of a former decommissioned coal plant. I think that's a cool story to tell, and of course, there's a lot of transmission, sitting there on that site, and it's nice to see those projects spring up and just bring more grid reliability. I think battery, definitely is something that can help with that peak demand for us as well. So dispatching it when it's needed.
And Scott, you mentioned this kind of in your comments, but with it being, are you limited in terms of the transmission, or how does that challenge the transmission to other places? I mean, how quickly? Do you want that to be located right next to, your transmission lines, or how close does that need? How close do you need that to be to where it needs to go? Hey, Scott, I think the speaker's not picking you up on the microphone.
Oh, interesting.
There, now it is.
It is now?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. All right, weird. Sorry about that. Yeah, again, our planners would tell you can put it anywhere. It's just how much transmission do you want to build, and that's why things like the Lansing facility usage is positive, because you already have the transmission from the retired coal plant that was at that site for years available to connect it. And so again, I think it's part of the planning process and part of the discussion. And we have these discussions whether we're talking about new load, new generation, or that sort of thing. What's the right place to do it that you can minimize the cost of getting something online? And that's an important piece of the affordability for customers on any of the discussions that we've had today.
Okay. I think one of the other questions that I wanted to ask is, with all of these new projects that come online and this sudden increased demand, how do you continue to kind of protect the existing customers, and how are you able to kind of balance the dependability for those existing customers in terms of being able to generate and deliver the power while still managing, turning on significant new ones? And Kylie, I think that's probably a question to you.
Sure. Thank you so much. It's a great question. It really should be paramount for everyone, right? But I'm so proud to say that I work with a team that this is the thing that they think about the most. And our regulatory framework in Iowa already allows us to keep our base rates flat for at least the next 5 years, as I said earlier, while still bringing on new generation projects and economic development projects. And then, as I was saying earlier, we really anticipate these new energy loads. And we've talked a lot about data centers, and that's really what is driving a lot of this. But bear in mind that manufacturing is often becoming a greater electric user too, because of automation, because of some companies' desire to remove natural gas, for instance, from some of their process. So all this new demand, the increase in sales, will of course allow us to spread our fixed costs further out. So rather than thinking about how could it negatively affect our customers, the reality is we really look at this as a unique, and I don't use that word lightly, a unique opportunity to grow as a company while also and thereby protect our customers from future rate growth or rate increases. I mentioned that the Iowa Utilities Commission authorized us to do an individual customer rate, an ICR is what we call it, to negotiate this new rate with large users. Again, that tool includes several protection mechanisms that we have at our disposal. For instance, collateral requirements for these end users should the load not materialize as we anticipated. How do we recover our costs and thereby protect our ratepayers? And each one of those ICR, those individual customer rate contracts, must be reviewed by the Iowa Utility Commission. And I certainly would defer to Sarah on what they'll look at there. But, their first and foremost in their mind is the importance of existing customers.
Yeah, I'll just give a broad overview of kind of the IUC's process in approving investments that utilities make, to give you an idea. So for generation investments from the investor-owned utilities, they come to the Iowa Utilities Commission either beforehand for some types of generation or in a rate case and say, hey, we want to build this generation. Here's kind of the reasoning behind it. Here's the filing requirements. We go through a pretty extensive proceeding, and then there's a determination of whether that's a prudent cost and then how it should be allocated to different customer classes. So there is a whole process behind that, and that's kind of how the IUC approaches generation costs. Excuse me. Now, transmission costs are regulated at the federal level, so I'll leave that to Scott to maybe dive into further if you'd like.
Yeah, and I can do that. I think, it almost starts with the answer I started to try to give on the wrong question earlier, where we were talking generation. I was thinking about new load projects. But, from the day that any new prospective customer knocks on the door and says we're interested, we're going to start looking at what it's going to take to serve them with, and you mentioned reliability there, Zach, in your question, to make sure that what we do isn't going to harm the other customers that are already in the system from a reliability and availability of power standpoint. And so the first conversations you have with any new prospect is, here's what it's going to take to build a system that can also serve you. And then that's where it kind of moves into the rate piece of that. And again, our rates are managed at FERC. They're approved at FERC, and then they come down as kind of a bulk rate, and that's where then the individual utilities are able to split that out in the method that makes the most sense and is most fair to customers, and that's where the individual customer rate and that sort of thing come into play as well. But we like to talk about it being a math issue, and we've had a math issue in Eastern Iowa for a long time, where the cost to maintain a system is always there. You're always having to make investments. You're always having storms. You're always having inflation. Well, almost always having inflation. These things that are adding to the cost. We've had the denominator in that math equation, or what's underneath the line that we're dividing it by, hasn't been growing, and we have this unique opportunity to see it grow now. And so yes, it's going to add a little bit to the numerator up top, but you're dividing it against a bigger number, and that's going to bring that benefit there. And again, you want to make sure you've got the protections in place. You got your contracts in place that if you're going to say you're going to do this year and you're going to take this much load, you're going to take that much load, and you're protecting others. And that's an important piece of this. But there's certainly great opportunity here.
I want to take a moment maybe to zoom in a little bit on fuel costs and advocate for wind and solar as free fuel from the sun and the wind. The more that we rely on large gas projects in the future, we might not see that immediate rate raise, but those costs are passed through to customers, and we know that it's a volatile natural gas market that's connected to world markets. The war on Ukraine in 2022 definitely caused a spike and fluctuation. We also will see, price increases when it comes to demand for those great deep winter freezes that we've been seeing more and more often. So I will caution that, the choices that we make and what kind of generation does still have an effect on ratepayers when we're paying the fuel cost.
If I can kind of pile on there just a little bit too, that's a piece with transmission as well. I mean, at least it depends on your utility, but I know our costs on an Alliant bill come out as a separate line item on those bills. The thing that is always an issue there is that the benefits that additional transmission brings, which is opening up the ability to bring in the lowest cost power and get it where it needs to be used at a certain moment, that doesn't show up in that line item. It shows up in that energy cost piece. And to Jordan's point, talking about some of these major winter storms, there's been research that's been done after the fact. They said, one line could have paid for itself in the large transmission line could have paid for itself in 2 or 3 days of Winter Storm Uri if it had been in place at that time. And so sometimes we hear the argument, well, we just need to stop spending money on transmission. We just got to recognize that cost will come in someplace else in a customer's bill if you don't.
And Scott, I wanted to just add to the math comment that you made earlier. That denominator hasn't been changing because the population of the state or the number of users has not been changing significantly. Is that a fair kind of?
Yeah, there's that. Even those numbers are, they're using less energy because they're being more energy efficient, which is a good thing. I don't want to make that sound like a bad thing. That's a good positive thing because it helps each individual customer's bills. But yeah, I mean, I can't speak for the full state. I mean, I know from you can look at the census and kind of play that out. But then you also, I did this a couple of years ago in my previous role, kind of looked at what the difference was between, if you were served in the Des Moines metro area versus in Eastern Iowa or in a rural area. And while the state may be growing, it's growing smaller or slower than everybody else. And it's growing in certain areas. And for, depending on who your utility is and who they serve, it may not be growing much. And so I know from an ITC perspective, if you go back the last decade or so, we're below 1% of net total growth there on the system. So the number at the bottom isn't changing, Zach, until now. It's going to. Yeah.
Meanwhile, you still have the cost and all of the maintenance of the system. Yep. Okay. I appreciate the clarification there. I did want to kind of go off of what Jordan said, to the point of the decision of which mode or which, whether to go with gas or whether to go with wind or to go with some of the other sources. I'm curious, how do those decisions get made? And are you modeling all of the options? Kylie, I don't know if this is one that's in your wheelhouse or not, but how do you decide? Okay, yes, we need to build more wind, or we're going to go solar. How is that decision being made?
Well, it's a great question. And our CEO, Lisa Barton, she likes to use the analogy of a Rubik's Cube. And if you think about a Rubik's Cube, any move on one side affects the other side, the other sides, right? So if you make an investment in generation, it has implications for availability of power. It has implications for existing customers, industrial customers, and for residential customers. And so it's just a constantly evolving system. Hence the importance of our resource planning that I described earlier. And that resource planning takes into account a variety of factors, including reliability, affordability, and of course, sustainability. And Alliant is very committed to providing a sustainable energy solutions for our customers. And that's both because of our core commitments as a company, and also from an economic development standpoint, I would emphasize that our customers, our commercial and industrial customers, demand clean power as they grow in markets where that's a priority, markets such as California, markets such as Europe, and of course, just domestically and generally, it's becoming more important. So when we're doing our resource planning, all of those factors are weighed against availability. You have to be able to site the facilities, of course, and the need to have base load generation. Wind, solar are critical components of our generation portfolio. But of course, there are times when they're not able to meet the full demand, and we must have that base load generation that comes currently from fossil fuels.
And does the siting or the kind of the individual control of, with wind, maybe you have to work across multiple counties. Are those types of the length of time that it could take to get work underway? Is that a factor, a major factor?
Well, it certainly is. And that really gets back to what you were touching upon about the 2028 deadlines. And hence, Alliant's constant effort to be bringing new renewables onto the system put us in an optimal position to safe harbor our wind projects going into 2028. There are long lead times. Wind is not necessarily, or solar is not necessarily a longer lead time than our other generation solutions. Really, it's a function of local requirements, local availability, and the willingness of communities to participate.
Thank you. Well, I think we have reached the end of our time together this afternoon. And so I wanted to say thank you to each of the panelists for sharing the information this afternoon. That went pretty quickly, and I think there's a lot of learning. I certainly learned a lot, and I know that each time I have conversations with folks, with each of your organizations, I'm learning a lot. So I appreciate you sharing that with us this afternoon. And so to our audience, I also want to say thank you for joining us today. We have one session, split time this afternoon. There's a Curious Iowa session, as well as civic engagement in Iowa. That's about to get underway in 2 minutes. And so for those of you, please join us there. And lastly, I want to say thank you again to Myron Construction, a session sponsor, as well as to ITC Midwest for their overall sponsorship of Iowa Ideas for the all 9 years, actually, that we've been doing this. So thank you to both of those organizations. And behalf of everyone at the Gazette, thank you for attending, and thanks for taking part this afternoon.